Welcome to another episode of the Above the Business podcast. My name is Bradley Hamner, your host. On today's episode, we have Henna Pryor. Henna was the #1 top producer and leader at a $2 billion staffing firm for over 14 years before becoming a top-rated global keynote speaker. I think you're going to definitely pick that up. She is an incredible speaker, but so energetic and personable, easy to connect with. I really love this conversation with Henna. She recently is the author of a fantastic book that I encourage you to pick up, Good Awkward, which was actually endorsed by NFL quarterback Russell Wilson and former Harvard Business Review editor Karen Dillon, and was also named a Kirkus Review's Best Book of the Year. She's also a 2 times TEDx speaker. We talk about all things around awkwardness in small business and entrepreneurship. We talk about the difference between being online and then connecting in the real world. I really loved the fact that we came at this conversation from so many different angles, and I really do, but it served me. And she has one liner in here that you're going to really love that certainly spoke to me, that I'm going to end up putting in my log of lessons learned. So without further ado, here's my wonderful conversation with Henna Pryor. Henna Pryor, welcome to the Above the Business podcast.
Thank you for having me. Can't wait to talk to you.
I'm excited about it. So background and origin story. We'd love to kind of go back and hear people's journeys about where they started, where they've been, and how they got to where they are today. So why don't you take us on your journey?
Great. So my professional journey, I have to start way back. We gotta hit rewind because I think it informs where things ended up. I am a firstborn of immigrant parents. My mom is from Pakistan, my dad is from India, and they were raised overseas. They came here when they got married, and I'm firstborn in the US. What does that have to do with my professional journey? I think it actually has quite a lot to do with it because, I had parents who didn't come to the country with a lot. I was watching them really build from scratch their own dreams, their own businesses. And in my case, they were small business owners themselves. I actually followed more of a traditional path, so achievement oriented family. I went for the straight A's. I wanted to be the star student, got the good college, got great grades there, got the good job. So my first job out of college was actually at Ernst and Young. I worked for a large Big Four public accounting firm for a few years, shiny, prestigious, lots of name recognition. I did not like it. I did not enjoy it. I am not meant to be an auditor. You can probably tell in my personality that accountant is not necessarily what I was made to do
Yeah.
on this earth.
Yeah.
But I did that for a few years, which led to pivot number one in my career. Pivot number one was actually to professional executive search and staffing. So I went and worked for a $2 billion staffing firm on the direct hire side. So I was working with both leaders, clients, and prospective candidates, matching dream jobs, dream companies with dream candidates. And I did that for 14 years. Actually found a real natural knack in that industry. Staffing is sales. I was in sales for 14 years. I was 100% commissions and found I loved it. I loved the consultative nature. I never felt like I was selling a day in my life. I felt like I was relationship building. I felt like I was advising. And in that career, I found something that I really enjoyed and frankly had some gifts in. But after 14 years of that, I kind of looked up and thought, all right, I'm doing it. I'm good at it. What's next? Right. Like
Mm.
I had this itch. I knew I was meant for something more. And to accelerate the story, a number of my clients had said to me, Henna, you're our staffing partner, but we really ought to pay you for all the executive coaching and advising that you do for us. And I'm thinking, oh, do I? I don't even know what that is. What is
Mm.
executive coaching? So I went and got certified in executive coaching just out of curiosity. Wasn't sure what I was going to do with it. Immediately fell in love, which created my last and final pivot so far, number three, which is, I'm sorry, number two, rather, 2.5, which is to start my own company. I say 2.5 because I pivoted career, but I also pivoted working model, which was I went into business for myself. That was 2019, and early 2020, I launched in earnest. Started as an executive coach, still do a little bit of that, but now it's 99% keynote speaking, workshops, breakouts, and authorship. And it's been on a wild ride ever since.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, I have to ask you, when I was
Yeah.
doing some research before we got started, so what is your favorite Chocolate. I see that you're a big chocoholic.
Okay. No, this is a great question. And in fact, because it's my favorite, I have some next to me at all times. So
Oh,
here's one
okay.
that I do not want people to sleep on. So I love fancy chocolate, artisan chocolate, but I also love a Twix, right? So I'm chocolate, universal here. I'm not super specific, but there is a chocolate that is incredible and not expensive. So Thrive Market. So for
Okay.
those who
Yep.
can't see the video, there's an online grocer called Thrive Market, and they make their Thrive Market brand organic chocolate truffles. Do not sleep on these, my friend. They are inexpensive, but they taste like your finest, fanciest bean to bar chocolate. So I just nibble on these all day. In fact, there's a second box behind this one just out of view. So these are my favorite.
Okay. All right. So that was a weird segue. That wasn't just completely random. It made to our audience feel that way. But here's why I asked that question.
Yeah.
I think before we hit record, you and I were talking about that because so many things have moved online, that people have struggled to be able to connect in the real world with difficult conversations, et cetera. And one of the things that I noticed whenever I was researching you and the topics that we would discuss is that you have made yourself very uniquely you. Like you are authentically you, is what I mean by that. There's like you put on there that you love chocolate as an example, and it creates this opportunity to get to know you at a certain level. I mean, I'm wearing Masters gear. People know to listen to the podcast. I'm a big golfer. I love basketball. I love my kids' sports. I love Auburn collegiate athletics, et cetera. So there's things that are about who I am. Just can you talk about the importance of being and putting the real version of yourself out there? Number one. And then number two, I think that'll be a transition into this idea of the difficulty of going from the digital world into in person.
Sure. So question number one is, this seems like an obvious thing we should all know to do, right? Show up authentically. But what most business owners and entrepreneurs get caught up in is, obviously a business is not going to be successful if people don't like what we're putting out there. They don't like the version of us that they see. If we are our business, right? Speakers, authors, coaches, mentors, advisors, it's even more challenging because the business often gets tangled up in the us, right?
Yeah.
Even when there's a product, service, solution based business, we need people to like it in order to purchase it. Now, that said, what that leads to sometimes dangerously is this level of performing. And so one of
Yeah.
the studies I cite in my book is about the dangers of catering. Oftentimes, when we are either new to a job, new to entrepreneurship, new to sales, whatever it may be, we try a little too hard to cater to the people that we're trying to serve
Yeah.
because we think that's going to get us better results. But there's actually a brilliant study out of Harvard by Francesca Gino and her team that studies entrepreneurs who are pitching to investors. And what they actually found is that those entrepreneurs who catered to the investors, meaning they tried to present what they thought the investors would like, actually were 3 times less likely to get the funding than those who came in sort of raw edges, stumbles, fumbles, fully expressed and fully themselves. Now, that shocks people because they're like, are we saying don't prepare? Of course not. Know your audience, know what you're doing, but understand that people can now increasingly sniff out a performative version of you. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's not about, Bradley, in your case, I don't think you woke up this morning and said, you know what? I need people to think I'm real authentic. So I'm going to wear this shirt or I'm going to think about my hat. In fact, it's the opposite. It's thinking less about it. It's just leaning into whatever your natural thing is and trusting that if you are respectful and mindful of what you do, you're not being, rude, then largely these are things that make people feel connected to you. So it's
Mm.
taking away that little shell that we put on of performance, because not only is it not really worth our energy and effort, it's actually not helping our business either. The data
Yeah.
supports that it's not helping.
I think that's so good because I wanted to draw a distinction between the overt, obvious lying that you're taking a picture in front of your McLaren and you don't own the McLaren. That's actually not what I'm talking, it was not what I was referring to. Clearly,
Right.
that is
Right.
happening. Yes, of course, but it's more about not presenting the full authentic version of just who you are. And I think you're so right about, just caring less about it versus how am I being perceive the image, so to speak, about it. And so square something up for me though, because I'm curious about this, is how do I then, because you mentioned it, but I think there's a nuance here, and I just would love to kind of bring it together, is how do I pay attention to what the audience, the boardroom, I was obviously speaking to Fatini about that just a little bit ago, and in that setting, seeing what they want, but then you being uniquely myself, whether it's that or the audience that you're speaking to, and maybe whenever you're going and speaking to a conference, the group that's organizing that, right? And figuring out who their audience is and what the message is and tailoring yourself, but yet uniquely being still you. Like I'm trying to square those two circles up to say, I'm going to see what the audience wants, but I'm at the same time still going to be uniquely myself. Does this make sense?
Yes. Yeah. And I'm going to answer the question from a reverse angle, because when we're thinking about this perception, so I want to maybe use a couple definitions to help frame this conversation. What my expertise is on, what my book was on, was, the emotion of awkwardness. Is if I don't show up a certain way, it's going to make me feel like X because I'm worried I'm going to get it wrong. Awkwardness is tied to approval. If I don't look like I know what I'm talking about, if they feel like I'm unprepared, I'm going to feel embarrassed by that. I'm going to feel awkward about that. What I want to maybe say here first to answer your question is awkwardness is not the same as ineptitude. These are not the same things. So when we talk about obstacles to authenticity, because that word authenticity, you and I both know it is getting tossed around like a tennis ball these days, right? This is just the word and everyone hears it. And yes, we should be more authentic at work. And I can't tell you how many people say to me, yes, great. How come that feels easier to say than it is to actually do? What does it actually mean? What does it look like? The emotion of awkwardness is a barrier to authenticity. Okay, what if I bring my whole self, bring all of it? And they're like, nope, that's not what we were expecting. Or this wasn't, what we find palatable. This isn't what we approve of. Then we feel a certain way about it. It's a social emotion. Too many people confuse awkwardness with ineptitude. Ineptitude implies being deficient in a certain skill or not having competence in a certain area. So what I am not suggesting, please don't do this, is showing up to a boardroom meeting or showing up in front of an audience for a pitch conversation and not having done your homework and not having been prepared. I want you to have done your homework. I want you to have been prepared. I want you to know that person's pain points. I would like you to know a little bit about their business. We are not talking ineptitude. What we are talking about is there will likely be a moment in that conversation where something goes sideways. Somebody says something you didn't expect. They asked you something you weren't prepared for. So actually, I'll make this very real. I was in a keynote recently, and at the end, I don't always do Q&A, but I had an opportunity to do some Q&A. And somebody asked me a question on something for which I am perceived to be the expert. And I had no idea. So situations like that invite the emotion of awkwardness of, okay, I'm supposed to be perceived as X, and now I look like Y. Embracing that emotion, embracing the non-performative version in that moment doesn't mean doubling down on my ineptitude. Oh man, I'm an idiot. I should know that. No, we're not going to do that. True authenticity in that moment looks like, I'll be honest, I'm standing up here and I am supposed to be the expert on this, but the truth is in this moment, I have an idea of what I want to say, but I don't have full confidence in that answer without spending a little bit more time on the research. So in order to not give you a half-baked answer, I'm going to actually put a pin in that. I'm going to collect everybody's information after this session and make sure I give you an answer that I feel 100% confident in. And then if I feel bold enough, I might say, here's what I'm thinking, but let me back this up with the research and let you know for sure. That's an authentic answer. That doesn't make me sound inept. It doesn't make me sound like an idiot. That's just the truth. That's a real thing. But even that, people sometimes struggle to come at with their whole self.
It reminded me, and I had to look it up real quick because I lost his name, but Simon Sinek he was on, I think, Stephen Bartlett's Diary of a CEO podcast, and he was talking about, to your point, he was given a keynote, and he's, I don't know what he garners in a keynote, but a lot. And he was giving a keynote, something he's done many, many times about a topic he knows well. I'm sure it was maybe Start With Why or something like that. And he completely lost his train of
Blanked.
thought.
Yeah, I've seen this. Yeah.
Have you seen this?
Uh-huh.
And I think somebody from the audience said, he was like, what was I talking about? Right. and he talked about embracing the vulnerability of that, right? So he clearly, I'm sure he did this research and prepared and knew that, but he got lost in that, and I think that vulnerability in those type of situations and that awkwardness, you can begin to embrace it. I love the distinction between that and ineptitude, awkwardness
Right.
versus an ineptitude. You come across as you have such a palatable energy about you. Like you have such an energy through a Zoom, let alone on stage. Do you find yourself still in awkward situations? And
Oh, constantly.
how do we, because you seem like somebody who would never find yourself in an awkward situation.
Oh,
And I mean that as a compliment.
yeah, no, constantly. And it honestly, it makes you laugh when people say that, because whatever perceived polish or confidence people see now is years of practice and honestly learning how to shake off the shackles of approval that were over my ankles for most of my life. I mean, I have cared deeply. So, those who can't see me and they're just hearing me, I'm of South Asian descent. I mentioned that my parents were Pakistani and Indian. There is an expression that I grew up with, and if you have any South Asian listeners, they'll probably know it, which is "log kya kenge," which translates to "what will other people think? What will the community think?" And so growing up, every decision I made, the major I chose, the man I married, everything for a while was filtered through this lens of not what brings you joy, Henna. What will other people think?
Hmm.
Right. So I deeply, deeply cared what other people thought. Anything that threatened awkwardness or embarrassment, I avoided like the plague for a really, really, really long time. And it took years of me finally realizing that every choice I made was a choice. So by avoiding this situation over here, I was choosing something else over there. Inaction is a choice. Everything is a choice. And so I had to really start to untangle those messages. I still get it wrong constantly, but here's what's interesting about the emotion of awkwardness. The emotion that I now embrace, or let's say the brand of confidence that you now see, I like to think of it as awkward confidence. I am not always polished. In fact, I am rare. It's easier for me to be polished in these business settings because I've practiced. To see me around my friends when I'm less articulate, less careful, none whatsoever. But we think of people who appear very confident as, oh, they're cool, they're calm, they're collected, they're flawless. Yes, sometimes. But the people that we see as most confident are actually the ones that can flub, and their comeback rate is lightning fast. Example, my opening story in the book is Jennifer Lawrence, the actress. At the Oscars, she tripped on her dress on the way up to the stage to collect her trophy. Now, this is in front of millions of viewers. She's at the most glamorous event on all of television. And she gets up on stage and immediately says, you're all just clapping because I fell and that's embarrassing, but thank you, right? She owns it immediately. And she's beloved around the world as confident, as charming, as disarming. This is true of everyone. I share a story in my book about after the pandemic, I had my first meeting with a leader after a long time, right? We hadn't all convened in a while. And I'm sales pitching him. I'm giving him 15 minutes of my finest pitching. I've been in sales for 15 years. I know what I'm doing. He puts his hand up and I'm like, Henna's nailing it, high five. And I high five the guy. And he literally says, I'll never forget it. He says to me, Henna, my hand was up because I was trying to get you to stop.
Oh.
I was like, oh God, oh dear God, right? Like blood is draining out of me. And I had two choices in that moment. I could have sat there and let the blood continue to make my face beet red and burning hot, or I could own the moment. And so, thanks to my own research, I knew that the quicker I could own the moment, the more confident I would appear. Woo, that's embarrassing. I really misread that one. I thought you were going for the high five. Cringe. Let's move on from that. We laughed. His shoulder fell. My shoulders fell. And we moved on. In fact, I would argue that we were even more bonded as a result of that experience. And so confidence isn't flawlessness. Confidence these days is just being able to own our entire humanity, including the less glamorous blender parts. But thank you for thinking I'm flawless. I am not, even though you didn't say that, but I'm definitely not.
Are you an agency owner looking to grow your revenue, increase your bottom line, and better manage your taxes? Club Capital is here to help. Club Capital is the largest accounting and advisory firm for insurance agents in the country, providing monthly accounting, tax strategy, and CFO services. Way more than bookkeeping and your everyday run-of-the-mill tax prep, Club Capital is focused on providing financial and tax advisory services that help you plan and forecast your agency's performance. Their financial dashboards and agency forecasting tools help you better understand your agency's historical performance, create and measure future targets, and see how your agency compares to your peers around the country. Imagine what it would be like to understand the impact to your bottom line when deciding to hire a new employee, or forecast the impact rate changes or commission rates will have on your business. With over $200 million in tracked annual revenue and $140 million in tracked annual expenses, Club Capital has the data and the team to help you make better informed decisions for your agency. They will help you turn that back office stress into the backbone of your agency's success by giving you the tools to take your agency and your leadership to the next level. Visit club.capital today to book a solution overview with one of our business consultants. Club Capital, way more than a CPA firm. Ambition is the first step towards success. It's time to level up your agency. And Coach P Consulting will help you do just that by using the same strategies he used to sell over 700 life insurance policies in 2021 alone. Now, this is not your regular one and done type coaching. You'll get personalized coaching 2 days a week, every week of the month, and you'll get a live look behind the scenes of his team training and an office that's performing at the highest level. There's a reason Coach P Consulting is the fastest growing coaching company for insurance agency owners in the country. Coach P will train your team alongside his own and show you the exact steps they're taking to achieve Chairman Circle, exotic travel, and multi-line presence club, and be one of the few agents to be selected to have a third office. So whether your goal is to be at the top of your local market or amongst the best in the country, this training will give you the strategies and the tactics to get there. For just $250 a month, you'll get high-level coaching each week from someone who is already getting it done at that level, and his strategies work, and it's time to put them to work for you. Sign up at coachpconsulting.com.
Two things that stood out to me. I about choked on my drink when I heard you say, letting the shackles of approval go. I was like, oh my goodness, what a one-liner. I am putting that. I have a log of lessons learned that I have, their one-liners, quotes, etc., that I learned throughout the year. That is going in the 2024 log of lessons learned. That is fantastic. Second thing, and I'll come back around to that because I've got a question around identity as a business owner, entrepreneur, and performance. But before I get there, one thing that in my small group, one of the men in my small group shared with me about a year, maybe 2 years ago, is this saying, I can be. And so in other words, if somebody says, Bradley, you come across as confident, I can be. Mm-hmm. So when you said sometimes, I was thinking to myself, I can be confident. I can do this. I can do that. And I can also be very not confident. I can be extroverted at times. And then I think a lot of people would be very surprised about I can be very incredibly introverted. My social tank is done and I need to get away from everybody and everything to be able to recharge. And so that I can be has been helpful to me. So I want to wrap back around to performance, because and that kind of came from the shackles of approval, is that sometimes the business owner has in their own head, his or her head, about what they need to be achieving: business revenue targets, the first time you cross $1 million, the first time you hit X amount of dollars in premium, maybe you win industry awards. There is both an internal thing that I need to do it to satisfy my own expectations, but also, let's be real, there is external things that people are looking at, is that if I don't achieve this, I don't qualify for this, I don't do these things, I don't have my picture on the PowerPoint slide at the industry conference, then I'm a loser. I'm a loser.
Yeah.
And so how do we square up, again, it just happens to come up twice now, square up this idea of wanting more, wanting to always continue to grow personally and professionally, yet at the same time, not being driven by what other people think?
Great question. So I'll say two angles come to mind here. Number one is, I think you started to allude to it, which is prioritizing and celebrating the right things. And that distills down to process over outcome, right? If you're committed to the process, if you control the controllables in your business and execute at a high level of excellence, the outcomes will come. That said, though, I think the second thing, which is maybe less talked about in the professional development spheres, especially in the entrepreneurial spheres, is we are now living in an attention economy. Being relentlessly committed to an A+ process isn't enough. There's a lot of people who are relentlessly committed to process, and they fall into a sea of other people who are relentlessly committed to process. So in an attention economy where there's a lot of noise, I think this is part of where the authenticity comes back in. People hear that, but authenticity by definition doesn't mean homogeneity, meaning we're not all authentically the same. That's kind of not the point. And so one of my early coaches, I remember when we were fleshing out keynote topics, but I think that this applies to even business ideas, is give people something they desire. If there's no demand for it, you're wasting your time, right? Give people something they desire. But this is the part that I think is interesting. Are you willing to do it via a means they didn't expect? Or even if it's a means that they expect, are you willing to deliver the idea, market the idea, sell the idea via a means they didn't expect? And it's those of us that are willing to just be a little bit different in our approach. Not a 90 degree, not a 180, even a little bit different in our approach. My personal take is these are the people that will stand out. These are the people that are going to rise above the fray, rise above the noise, and actually get paid a bit of attention to. But willingness to be a little bit different means inviting the people that may not like it, right? The very virtue of being a little bit of different is you're disrupting the status quo. And there's a lot of people who like the status quo. The big, takeaway here is, guess what? That has nothing to do with you. Whether they approve of the way you've done it has nothing to do with you. And if you get real caught up in that, it's, fish dead in the water. I constantly get feedback forms after keynotes, and there are, 95, 98% of people saying, this was so fresh. This was such a breath of fresh air. This was something different. And then there's always a percentage of, this was a little too avant-garde for me. This was a little too, right? Stop trying to please everyone. If you are trying to stand out in a noisy marketplace, you have to be willing to zig a little bit while everyone else is zagging, and just be prepared mentally and physically that will sometimes feel at odds with our social acceptance desires as human beings. But if we try to please everybody, we please nobody. So we have to be willing to stand out a little bit.
I think it's great. And then I want to take it to the extreme side too, because there's a few people, both global figures that present themselves this way, but then I think in our own individual lives, there's a few people that we could probably point to that have such an arrogance, have gone so far into, I don't give a damn what you think. Excuse my language on that, but and it's like, well, God, that's not what we're talking about either. That's gone too far to a point of like, you're so like, I don't care, I'm going to do me type thing, that puts off people too much too. So, thoughts on that?
Yes, no, I have strong thoughts on this. In fact, in the spirit of time, I will humbly point people to my second TEDx, which is there such a thing as good bragging? The new way to brag in the modern world. But the themes of that really apply to what you're saying here. When we think of people who are arrogant, entrepreneurs, business owners, or frankly, anyone, leaders who are arrogant, we tend to think of people who are hyper-focused on solo validation. It's look at me, look at what I've done, look at, the accomplishments that I have, and look at how much I care zero for other people. It's the me show. But those who share their wins broadly, they enroll other people in, they have conviction. What they tend to do, whether we realize it or not, is something in the talk I refer to it as social celebration, which is this is why this is good for all of us. This is why taking this approach is going to help us all lift. When it becomes I'm only sticking my stake this far in the ground to make myself feel different. I'm not saying be different for the sake of being different, but if what you're doing a little bit differently helps serve the mission, helps create more impact, helps enroll more people into your idea that in some way, shape, or form is going to do good for your industry, then that approach, you can be proud of the differences. You can be proud of the things, but what it boils down to is intention. There's two actions that can happen from two very different people that look the same from a behavior standpoint. But if one clearly has the intention just to prop themselves up alone, that solo validation, and one has the intention to say, hey, we're going to look at this a little differently. This idea might seem, rogue, but here's why we're doing it. Here's the impact on all of us. Then even though the actions may be the same, the intentions are different, and we tend to absorb them very, very differently.
That's so true. I happen to know someone that in a particular sport is fairly well known. And I say that because of my connection to them is totally random. We're not friends. I don't have his number. I just know who he is. And I've been around him maybe 4 times. Okay. So not very many times. And because of his connections, that he knows people. Okay. He just given what he is. But you cannot be around him for 5 minutes that he has not name dropped 12 people. And you're like, I get it. I know these people. I know that President Bush, right? Like I get it. You don't have to say these things, and it becomes exhausting in a opposite of good branding. It's or bragging. It's dropping names all the time because I think the intention is off to what your point is what I was thinking.
Exactly. It's the intention. And then to circle back to what we mentioned before, it starts to feel like a performance, right? If they're so focused on naming those names, then what you start to feel, whether you're conscious of it or not, is this person is not present in this conversation.
Right.
This person is performing for me right now. They're actually not interested or curious or here with me in the conversation. They're just very excited to rattle off this list of names. And so I think it's a combination of those two things, the intention and the performance, that we can start to sniff out.
Yeah, that's good. How did you come up with talk to me about the genesis of the book, Good, Awkward, the book title itself first, and then let's walk people through maybe just a 30,000-foot view of the book structure, et cetera.
Sure. So, besides my own, we kind of touched on my origin story. I was immigrant kid, felt awkward all the time. My clothes were different. My food was different. There was a lot of things that were part of my upbringing that created these emotions. And I think once I got to college, I thought, okay, I've dealt with that emotion, right? Like I feel like I've sort of found my people at this point. But then the funniest thing happened. I entered my professional career, and at every inflection point, every growth point, every transition point, that dirty little feeling came back again. I was like, now more people are watching. I feel awkward again. Nope. Now I'm afraid I'm going to get it wrong. Oh, I'm going to embarrass myself. Every growth point, that emotion came back. And I remember the thing that catalyzed the book really early on is our queen, Brene Brown, kind of revered in the professional development space. She would, at the end of her podcast episodes and at the end of her interviews, she started to coin this little tagline. She would say, stay awkward, brave, and kind. That became one of her taglines. And I remember hearing it and thinking, brave, yes, I know that's important. Kind, my parents taught me that one. Stay awkward. Clearly, Miss Brene, you were not raised as a Pakistani kid in the US, right? Like I don't want to stay awkward. I've been trying to avoid this my whole life. And I just realized that no one had done a proper deep dive on this specific emotion of social discomfort as it relates to the workplace. Yeah. And increasingly now, I would say even just as I was writing the book, the research was starting to pour out. This is not in the book because it's new research, but it just came out. US Surgeon General Vivek Murthy just returned from a research trip to the UK where he was studying young adults. And he found that young adults, teens and young adults, are actually now struggling to have conversations in the physical world because they are so used to living their lives online. And so when I think about awkwardness, I think about our social fitness. Our social muscles are atrophying, are weakening. And this is not just young adults. This is folks that now work in hybrid environments, whether they're entrepreneurs, business owners who work with their customers hybrid. We don't have the same proximity in our structures that we used to, which means we're losing the natural friction, the natural messiness that comes with constantly being around each other in real life, which is creating even more weakening of this social muscle. So just more and more, since there's a lot of really, really powerful research and data in the book and a lot of stories and real life examples, but even since its pub date, which was only 6 months ago, I'm seeing more and more studies come out about the decline in our social fitness. And I think as entrepreneurs and business owners, it's really important that we double down on this particular skill, because this is something that AI will not do for you. And so we
No,
need to actually get very intentional about that.
yeah, that's true. You can't AI human relationships and community. That's for sure.
Nope.
Yeah.
Nope.
One of the things that I loved from your website that I really picked up on and beforehand, and it really has stuck with me personally and will stick with me after this conversation, is there's a slide from you speaking, the slides behind you, and it says, it's impossible to get better at anything and look good at the same time. And there are so many times that I have been with one of my coaches. I've been in a room or an environment with someone. They have shown a slide that one of my masterminds I'm a part of. These two partners, they are in the software tech space, and these guys are so incredibly creative. The things that like their Google slide decks are so beautiful. I mean, I'm like, I didn't even know you could do some of those things on Google Slides. So this is
Yeah.
incredible. And I'm looking at mine and I'm looking at theirs. I'm like, how do you do that? I don't know how you do that, right? And they start to make things look so beautiful and easy. And so I think that there's been times, and this is leading to my question, is that when I've looked at somebody like that, that's just a specific tactical example about somebody's Google Slides, right? And I think I can never get there. I just can't ever get there. As
Yeah.
many times as they say, look, we didn't either. We didn't either. I mean, we remember the first times we even used Google Slides,
Yeah.
and it was messy and it was this and it was that and all these kind of things. And they leaned into it and they worked through it. And then they got to where they are. They were not born at, and then at 12 years old, they're editing Google Slides. Like, that's just not how it worked.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
can you just speak to the fact of, like, at times getting better at something is leaning in and it being awkward and it being messy and it being
Yeah.
not what the way it want it to be, but that's how we actually end up getting there.
Yeah, I think that there's two things that come to mind there. First of all, it's, our shared friend Jake Thompson often uses this language of, it's not me versus them, it's me versus me,
Yeah.
right? It has to be me versus me. And I am as human as the next person. I will occasionally look at some other speaker's, speaker reel or some other author's book. And I'm like, dang, like, I wish I did that. That's so good. I remember Jake, bless him. When he got a copy of my book, he's like, oh, I wish mine, like, now I wish I did this, I did that. That's human. And I think it's actually healthy for us to have people, friends that we admire certain things that they've done. It inspires us to push harder, to do better, to be more innovative, to compete, right? These are not bad things. But if we get hooked into the constant me versus them, then that becomes damaging and it actually becomes a crutch. It becomes paralyzing. It makes us not want to do anything because the target keeps moving. So then it has to be twofold. Me versus me. Have I improved since last year? Do my slides look better than last year? If not, let me at least try to improve one thing. Maybe it's fonts, formatting, photos, whatever. And then the second thing, and I encourage this towards the end of my book, is take a bird's eye view every now and then. If we think about all of our little, missing components or things that we're doing sloppy, messy, blundery right now, we could literally put a laser focus on that and not see anything else. But if we bird's eye view to, remember that content I created a year ago, right? Remember that first talk I gave and how messy it was and how I had to read my slides word for word? And it's just perspective, right? Of how far we've come. But, that's daily work. That is daily work to remind myself me versus me, because I think it's healthy to aspire to a better, level of production, of quality of slide. It's unhealthy when I get so fixated on it that I stop celebrating what I have done and what I'm capable of doing. So just know how you're doing it, I think, is number one. The second thing I would say on this is just part of improvement on anything, and I try not to speak in absolutes, but truly anything, is doing it in a way or going at it in a way where a little bit of mess or failure is likely to be a byproduct. I don't know, truly. Think of any discipline, skiing, speaking, writing. I don't know any author whose first draft is the one that was published. I don't know any skier who went on a black diamond on the first try. Like, this is part of the process. And in certain disciplines, we remember that very acutely. Sports, of course, that's part of, falling down. Yeah. Speaking, sure, you're going to stumble every now and then. But then on our day to day, we don't give ourselves the same grace. We're like, nope, perfection the first time. That's it. And so just daily self-talk, reminding yourself, this is part of the process. This is part of the process. Blunders are natural. Looking a little messy along the way is natural. Ask the person you admire most if they nailed it the first time. I guarantee you the answer is no. And I think one of our greatest opportunities as a society right now, back to this digital world we all live in, is creating space for these conversations. One of the things I coached, business owners and leaders on is at the top of a meeting for 5 minutes, share your cracked egg stories. Times this past week, this past month that you thought something was going to go one way and it definitely went the other way, right? Mistake, misstep, blunder. Share your bad idea brainstorms. Everybody deliberately come up with an idea in this meeting that's likely to be very unrealistic. No good. And they're like, well, why do we do that? Because the ideas that tend to follow when you do exercises like this are more creative, more generative. People are less likely to brush their mistakes under the rug, because when we don't bring spaces for these conversations, we tend to, as humans, feel like it's just us. Yeah. I'm the only one struggling this much. So more than ever, since we're not watching each other do these things, we have to create spaces where we talk about them.
I think this is an area that I'm going to change the way I run our weekly team meetings, our weekly business reviews. We start off with the very first thing we start off is clear outcomes. So we say, hey, for this next hour, what is the clear outcome? Okay, so we give everybody about 90 seconds to write down, I really need to cover this. I need to cover this. Okay, so we got that out of the way of the clear outcome of the meeting. And then we can do wins and progress. And this is where I was thinking, celebrate the wins, celebrate the progress. Yes,
for sure.
But I think right after that, I think I'm going to add in, where did you fail last week?
Yeah. Where did an egg get cracked? Absolutely.
An egg get cracked is a great way to put that. And I think I may do that with my kids as well, to celebrate the stumbling towards the good things versus always celebrating wins, which, by the way, I think if you don't celebrate wins at all, then you're not going to see them, right? And especially business and entrepreneurship is full of a lot of failures. And so we can fixate too much on those. But also I think it's the framing of the celebration of the cracked egg and saying, okay, well, what did we learn from it? I think it's fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, again, I agree with you. Celebrating wins is important. That breeds momentum. But at the same time, it's funny, I'll have conversations with other aspiring speakers who, I say this with full gratitude and all the humility I can muster. If you look at my social media, I am killing it. Like I am on a tear. And I tried to launch a mastermind a couple months ago. I did it last year. It filled up lightning fast. This past one, bustola. Now, to be fair, I probably didn't give it much attention and nurture it the way I did last time. But this one, womp, big flop. I kind of quietly just closed it and was like, not going to do it this time. But I tell people that, and they're like, really? Really? I'm like, ooh, you've gotten this perception that everything I touch is gold for some reason. Like, no, ma'am, definitely not. And out of all the cool things we talk about, that's what sticks with them. And I'm like, this is what's missing, because we don't have regular spaces to share these conversations. And so we actually need to manufacture them. We need to create them.
That's so true. There is somebody I really look up to. And at this point in his career, everything he seems to touch, it's like $1 million business in 12 months, another $1 million business in 12 months. That one hit an 8-figure run rate in 2 years. And you're like, what in the world? But what's endearing about him is that I know his backstory, and I know that one failed, that one failed, that one failed, that one failed. Then he started to just knock them off because he learned the skills that it takes. And so, I think that's actually really true, because conversely, there are some people that I know, it's like, man, have they ever had a setback? I mean, has it just been a rocket ship since the beginning? Like, and if so, and they write that book, I'm not reading that book, right?
Yeah, exactly. No, in fact, some of your previous guests, Jake Thompson, Fotini Economopoulos, and then our friends, Colin Henderson, the four of us will meet, every now and then and do exactly this. What is sucking? What are we struggling with? Like, find spaces where you can do that if you don't have them already.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful. Henna, this has been great. People want to connect with you, find out about you, your book, speaking. Where would you point them to?
I am Henna Pryor on all the socials. LinkedIn is my primary playground, but also Instagram, hennapryor.com. And the book is called Good Awkward. It's on Amazon, at Barnes and Noble, everywhere books are sold, and always happy to link up with new friends. So make it awkward and say hello. I invite you.
I love it. All right, last question. What does above the business or being above the business mean to you?
Oof, I love this question. Being above the business is very present to me right now because I have been in the weeds of my business way too much. So being above the business to me, it means being willing, having the courage to zoom out and figuring out if the direction that you're going is still the direction that you intended to go.
Mm.
And I have a bias for action. I will do. I will hustle as hard as anybody can possibly muster until I sometimes get there. And I'm like, wait, is this what I was doing? Is this what I wanted? Was this the end goal? So getting above the business, I think is having the courage to slow down and do a directional check. Is this still where I want to go? Is this still where I'm headed, and making adjustments that support that?
That's fantastic. What a great answer. Henna, thank you so much. Hope to have you back on in the future.
Thank you. This was a blast. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. I've been so fortunate to get to connect with and hear so many different people on the podcast over the last 4 years. And there are a few people that really stand out with their energy that they bring that is really infectious, even if it's over through a camera over Zoom. And Henna is one of those. But it's not just the energy. There's so much depth and substance and so many different one-liners that I took away. Dropping the shackles of approval certainly was one that I connected with. There's no question about it. But I also think that whenever she was even sharing from her own story, her vulnerability about things that haven't gone the way that she wants them to go, like the mastermind that she openly shared about, it's made me want to continue to also share in the right context certain things, whether it's in business or personal as well. Again, maybe it's on the podcast, maybe it's not. But I think hopefully that opens and allows you to maybe even share with your team and in your small groups and in your study groups and in your masterminds, not just the posturing and the positioning and the things that you're doing well. And there's, as she said, there's even good bragging, like how to brag in a way or be able to talk about your accomplishments in a way that actually draw people closer to you than to push them away. And I think that also the part where we talked about, or she mentioned process over outcome resonated with me as well. And then the last one that she gave credit to Jake Thompson about, but me versus me, using other people. Before we hit record, I was briefly talking to Henna about, her book and the book launch and how she did that. And I look at her press kit page on our website and I look at the book and it's like, wow, that's so well done. And it's inspiring, right? I don't look at that as competition in any way because I want to be able to do that. And so then what's the process she went through? Did she go on a writing retreat? Did she write it over the course of 2 years? What was her process like? And she may share it and I may say, oh, that's not going to work for me. But it also may be something where it's like, you know what, I think that actually may work. That's a little detail that actually is really helpful. So thought I'd share that with you. Those were some of my key thoughts and takeaways that were incredibly helpful from this interview with Henna. As always, shout out to our podcast partners, Autopilot Recruiting, Coach P Consulting, Club Capital, and Today app. If you're looking for a place to be able to have all your bonus, your compensation plans, word tracks, and get away from just all of the different spreadsheets that you have. And I love a good spreadsheet for sure, but there's definitely times where having a software where your team can be able to put in their sales, calculate their bonuses, their compensation, but also use as they're having conversations with prospective customers, look no further than Today App. Go to todayappro.com. Let them know whenever you submit a request, by the way, that you've heard about them on the Above the Business podcast, todayappro.com. We just finished up tax season. If you had some surprises, didn't get the numbers you were looking for, maybe you didn't have surprises at tax time, but possibly your numbers were not exactly where they needed to be. Maybe the year-over-year growth and the profitability numbers were just not exactly where you want them to be, but you want to begin to kind of set some forecast in place to make certain changes and slowly inch your profitability up over time, as well as being able to stay on top of your taxes. Club Capital can help. Go to club.capital and book a no obligation demo. Club.capital. Yeah, I love the idea of build the team and the team builds the business. Build the team and the team builds the business, but that means you got to start with building the team. You want to build the team with A players, but how do you do that? One of the hardest parts, I mean, people have heard all the time, recruit every day, right? Be recruiting, always be recruiting, right? You've heard that, but that gets hard to put into an overall system. What does that actually look like? Some of you have a big enough team to be able to have dedicated people on your team to do that. But even if you do, and many of you may or may not, but even if you do have that, Autopilot Recruiting can step in and can be a better, more cost-effective way, and they're experts in being able to source candidates, do some of the initial interviews, filter them through, go through some assessments, then turn over to somebody on your team much more quality candidates. So go to autopilotrecruiting.com, autopilotrecruiting.com. I've known David for a long time, and one of the things I really love about David is that he is always able to be able to share the things that are working behind the scenes, which may mean that also some things that they were doing before aren't working. And so you get a peek behind the true nuts and bolts of the business, not just sometimes the high level theoretical things, which are helpful for sure, but they're not always the kind of things where, how do I implement that? Well, both for you and your team, twice a week calls and a once a month business owner only call, David can help. Go to coachpconsulting.com and let David know you heard about him on the Above the Business podcast. All right, everyone. Love that interview with Henna. Go check out her book, Good Awkward. Until next episode, lead well.